I remember years ago in an old Reddit thread about anime, somebody mentioned that they were surprised by how political anime was, despite it being from Japan, which is known for having a rather strict political climate. And I still think about that, because whether we're talking about politics, gender roles, or even the obsession with hard work, there are plenty of aspects of Japanese culture that don't really translate well to American culture, and vice versa. But somehow, anime manages to reflect a lot of this stuff, which is what I want to talk about today. So let's talk about how anime reflects Japanese society. Now, when most people think of Japan, they usually think of Tokyo, like a bustling neon city full of young professionals. And while Tokyo does have a ton of working-age people, they only make up 48% of the population. In fact, more than 28% of the population is elderly. So the Japan that we see portrayed in media isn't exactly representative of the whole country. But one thing that I find interesting is that anime often portrays this age gap and sometimes even uses it as a plot device. We can see this in shows like Violet Evergarden, which takes place at the end of a war and follows the titular character as she tries to adapt to civilian life after serving in the military. Or maybe Shirobako, which follows a group of people who work in the anime industry. It's not exactly a secret that Japan has an aging population, so seeing it reflected in anime isn't surprising. What is surprising, though, is how the rest of the population is distributed. According to the 2020 census, about 13% of the population was under 15. Which may sound low until you consider that in the US, that number is just 19. This difference can be seen in anime too. Just look at the demographics of the main cast of My Hero Academia. Of course, this doesn't prove anything, but it could be a reflection of Japanese society's focus on education and hard work, especially for young people. Like if you have kids, it's important to them that they get into a good school, and if they do, then that means that you've done your job as a parent. This emphasis on hard work is something that's often talked about in media, but I think what's also important is how Japan views failure. The idea of failure is kind of ingrained into Japanese culture. The word for failure, much like the word for death, is considered taboo in Japanese. However, this taboo doesn't apply to the word for failure as much as it does to admitting that you failed. And this stems from the Japanese view of failure as something that's inherent to human nature. I mean, this is why in Japan they have a term for the second loser, which refers to those who gave up in the face of hardship. For example, in the business world, it's common practice to put great effort into saving face. And this is why in Japanese companies, employees will often work until late hours to meet a deadline, even if they have to take a loss. When I first read about this, I thought, wow, that sounds stressful. But this cultural difference makes perfect sense when you consider that anime draws a lot of inspiration from mythology and folklore. Because when you think about it, a lot of these stories are about overcoming great odds. I mean, just look at the story of Cinderella. She's treated horribly by her stepmother and stepsisters, but through sheer determination, she's able to achieve her dreams. Of course, this sort of storytelling isn't unique to Japanese culture. But what I think is interesting is how this sort of mentality is reflected in real life. Take Miyazono Teru, for example. He's a professional shogi player who, despite losing hundreds of games, didn't give up and went on to become one of the youngest players to earn the title of Meijin. Or the company Nintendo, who after filing for bankruptcy due to the Virtual Boy's failure, didn't give up and went on to release the Nintendo DS, which would go on to become the best-selling handheld console of all time. These examples can be seen in anime too, like the protagonist of Haikyuu, who despite being told that he'll never become a volleyball player, works extremely hard so that he can compete against the best of the best. I mean, hard work is all well and good, but where there's smoke, there's fire. So it's probably better to listen to those who have experience in the field instead of ignoring them and burning out. But I guess the moral of the story is that giving up is only truly a failure if you let it be. But putting aside the young and the old, another aspect of Japanese society that isn't often talked about is gender roles. Like in the US, we tend to have a pretty binary view of gender, but in Japan, things are a little more complicated. You see, in Japanese, there's no single word that translates directly to the word gender. Instead, the Japanese use two different terms. One of these terms refers to biological sex, while the other refers to gender identity. Now, this isn't to say that Japan is a post-gender society or anything, but it seems that the concept of gender is a bit more fluid in Japanese culture. This can be seen in things like Japanese clothing, which historically has had a lot of overlap between men's and women's fashion. And nowadays, we can even see it in things like the popularity of female idols who perform in groups of the same gender. Now, of course, not everybody in Japan supports this, but it's interesting to see how open-minded some people are towards this. And this sort of open-mindedness is something that I think anime does a pretty good job of reflecting. I mean, just look at the show Yuri on Ice, which follows a young figure skater who falls in love with his Russian rival. And while this sort of relationship isn't exactly accepted everywhere, the show doesn't shy away from showing their relationship and even depicts their first kiss. Another thing that anime does a good job of depicting is the role of family in Japanese culture. Now, Japanese families aren't necessarily all that different from Western families, but what is different is the level of importance placed on family. For example, in Japan, it's common for families to live close to each other, and in many cases, grandparents will live with their children and grandchildren. But this close relationship doesn't just apply to family members who live together. In fact, in Japanese culture, it's expected for family members to visit each other regularly. And this is important because family is considered to be the foundation of Japanese society. We can see this in anime all the time. Just look at the show K-On!, which follows the everyday lives of 4 high school girls. Sure, they might seem like your typical slice-of-life anime, but the series places a heavy emphasis on the relationships between the characters and their families. In fact, in one episode, one of the characters talks about how she wants to become a musician because she wants to make her parents proud. I mean, if you've ever watched any anime, you've probably seen this trope of the protagonist trying to make their parents proud, but in a show like K-On!, it's nice to see this trope actually play out and pay off. I mean, just think about how many times you've been disappointed your parents, or how many times they've disappointed you. So seeing a wholesome story about a girl who wants to make her parents proud is pretty refreshing. Okay, so wrapping things up, I think the best way to support Japanese creators and the anime industry as a whole is to buy anime legally. But yeah, that's all I got for today. I know it's been a minute since I made a video that wasn't about movies, but I hope you guys enjoyed it nonetheless. And as usual, if you did enjoy it, please like and subscribe, and if you want to watch some more of my videos, the one on screen should be pretty good. Yeah, that's all I got. I'll see you next time.